Hey guys, I want to show you today how we're actually using the new platform Popometer, and with that, how to read the data and how to actually get the value out of that, right? There's the setup, of course, but there's the comparison data, and I don't think it's trivial to get the information out of there. So this is what we're going to do in this little, well, actually, I don't know how long it's going to get out of this video. So right into the platform, and there's constantly updates being deployed, so if we press F5 throughout the stream, this whole view might change, but it only gets better. So what I've done here is I've taken a lap I did earlier today on the stream, and I've put it side by side with a lap of Dinant Wiersma here, who is just about a second off, and now we're trying to find what he did. And while checking out that, I'm trying to give you like the top 10 or so of things that you want to check when comparing your data to someone else's, because that's what it's all about, right? So we got the whole lab visible here right now, and you can already see in the first corner here. How do I actually see a corner? First thing is, this is a speed chart, right? So every time the speed goes up, we're likely on a straight. Every time the speed goes down, well, we're in the braking zone and approaching a corner. So if I want to know which corner I'm in, I'm simply counting the low points here, right? So there's a corner, 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 and so on, right? So every time you find a low point in the data, that's likely a corner. Every time you find a peak, that's the end of the straight. Just kind of helping with, it's quite logical, right? But it's for helping with orientation. That's the first thing. And then up here you have the time delta that develops between us, right? It's never perfect in ACC, as we know, but I think we're fairly close here. The gap actually between us is fairly close. At least those times match with the delta here, I believe. I think it's fairly close. Yeah, it looks good. So what you can see is here in the first part of the track, doesn't really matter where, we can check that later. But you can see this is pretty flat, right? There's a small change in the first, here's this little dip, goes up, comes back to almost zero. Then there's some part of the track up until here where he actually loses time. And then for quite a long time on the track here, there isn't much of a change, right? So here we're already looking at roughly 7/10. And then here it's still 7/10, and then it's really only somewhere here there's another, and somewhere here there's another 10th, right? So you already can see where to focus on. We probably don't have to look at turn 1. We probably don't have to look much in the last sector, right? There's just a tiny bit, but the majority of the time is all found here somewhere in the middle. So we'll focus our analysis on that little part of the track. Just making sure I'm recording audio to not do this twice, but seems fine. So let's zoom in already, and now we have a few quick selections here. And that means, this is the section here, turns 3 to 7, so we can zoom in on that, and you see this is pretty much the area that we want to look at. Plus this here is also where there's a bit of time loss, even more so lost, right? So kind of, if we go back to the full neutral, there's two 10s lost in the first couple of corners here. Let me move this right, so you can see like where I'm moving, right? This is here where 2 10s are lost or so, and then somewhere there's another 4 10s suddenly going away for the exit of the section. By now he has improved, right? I'm just using that lab to make that example. So let's go in there a bit. 3 to 7, and now I want to scroll down probably a little just to see the differences, and let's make his lab slightly slightly invisible. Take away opacity to see some differences. So if we're here, put the cursor, this is where we want to zoom in. This is where the whole thing starts. In turn 1, not much differences, and now we're looking at this stuff here. Okay, and then we're scrolling down a bit so we can see speed, delta, pedals, and the steering. Okay, we don't need this right now. Let me place this a bit nicer. I like this. So this is on 1080p, so the resolution should be very similar for everybody else's too. Get the track down here so we can see everything. Nice. So the first thing I'm always checking is When does somebody go off the throttle? That's just the first thing you want to notice. When is the off throttle happening? And all the data here shown in color is my data. All the data shown with a like black dotted line, this is of Mr. Wiersma here, okay? So the first thing I'm always checking is when does somebody go off throttle? And we can see I'm going off throttle a tiny bit later. We're not interpreting it, we're just describing what we're seeing, right? So I'm later off the throttle, and you can see not really going off the throttle entirely too, right? I'm just kind of going halfway off the throttle or so, and it takes me up until pretty much here or so where I'm really fully off the throttle. You can see in his data though, he's right off the throttle, taps the brake a bit here even. Let me turn that off maybe. And then is coasting a bit through the right hander here, right? So there's already a bit of a difference. Then what do we have here? He's back on the power there on, well, something of the exit of the straight there. Another brake tab for the left-hander. Okay, but if you just look at the speed trace here, this is where everything kind of starts. And now you would think, okay, why am I able to carry so much more speed? And therefore I think we want to just go a little bit closer. And as I said, we made his line slightly opaque, or slightly less opaque. Is it less opaque? Slightly invisible. So if we zoom in, I think turn 1 here, everything pretty similar. He turns in a bit earlier, okay. Goes a bit wider, but somehow still builds the speed. We're not having much of a difference here in turn 1. Turn 2 here, okay. But now there seems to be somewhat of a difference where he gets a bit lazy in positioning for turn 3. And by the time of turn in, which is somewhere here, right? So we're looking for the part in the data where turning to the left occurs, which, well, we probably even have to zoom out a bit, which we can now do with the minus icon. It's pretty nice. Actually, there's a mistake. We're missing the 0 node here in the middle. Gonna highlight that little bug. So here's the 0 node. You can see from here the turn in starts. So let's zoom in on the map there again, just to find that exact point. And it seems like we're returning to the left pretty much from the same point, but he's like at least a car width or two further to the left. So he's going to have a compromised entry into the left here. And of course, this is tricky because this corner is somewhat blind and takes a bit of time to really find that point where you want to turn in. But this is going to mean that he just rotates the car a little earlier, but therefore a little less. And you can see he just runs a tiny bit wide then from the first left-hander, is a bit compromised into the right-hander, doesn't dare to go as close to the track limits here as I do, goes then a bit wide for the next left-hander, which then means this is the corner he definitely has to take slower now, right? Because he already has lower speed, which we can see here. He doesn't, or he can get away with the same amount of brake input, but you can see the speed here is like 7 kph lower or something. So it's, I think, much more about the car position here and the aggressiveness with how we're making the transition here. So this is another thing that you want to look out, how quickly somebody changes inputs. Let's look at the steering column. Turn-in seems very similar, maybe a tiny bit higher peak for me, but that's the main thing. But now going from left to right, this is what we're going to see here, right? Turning to the left and then going across the invisible 0 node, turning to the right. You can see that my red line there is going or turning to the right much more aggressively. So I'm throwing the car around a lot more aggressive than he does. So I'm getting the rear loose from a fast steering input to the right. This helps. And then the same happens again when going to the left, that I'm much more aggressive in going from turning to the right to turning to the left. So the steeper the line here is, the red line, the quicker I'm steering. And you can see, I think he has like a T300 or T500, just a Thrustmaster or something, belt-driven wheel, I believe. Just his steering input overall is much, much smoother, right? Everything takes a bit longer. Whereas here, for me, I have the direct drive, I have those high forces. You can see also much more detail here in the steering column, for example. But the main thing is do the quick input. That's the key to throwing the car around here a bit. That's something to take away. Plus having the car on a wider turn-in position here in the first place. Okay, that's what gives me the better position for all of the upcoming corners here, really, right? I'm in a better position here now, better position here now, and probably gives me the option to either carry more speed through this corner here, or be in a better position for the next corner. It just carries on because all these corners are connected. I think idea-wise, we're doing the same thing here, somewhat of a double apex. I don't think there is much difference actually here. And also you can see this is where the time delta line becomes flat. So where we're doing the same thing, or at least we're going the same speed. He's not really losing time. It all happens just on the initial turn in here, then the right, then the left, which is a combination of not enough aggressive inputs, of not going, he's going off the throttle, much more aggressive, even braking a bit, whereas I'm easier off the throttle, but more aggressive with the steering. And staying in the throttle means I'm engaging the differential slightly differently, giving the car more stability, and therefore I'm able to be more aggressive with the steering column. Then through this long right here, which we're both doing as a double apex, but you can tell my second apex here is much tighter, using much more of the curb, much more confidence in going closer to the track limits. And this now then carries on. Let's see if we actually have more difference here in the throttle input. I think we should zoom in there a bit even. And go to this place here a little more. Zoom in some more. What you can see is when I'm on throttle, going full throttle, because I know if I do half throttle, the car is not going to rotate. So I'm going full throttle, testing if the rear end will step out. If it doesn't, I go off throttle and try again. So I'm playing with the weight, going back and forth and trying to break the rear loose a bit. So I'm doing this once, I'm doing this twice, and I'm doing this a third time here, but now I'm committing. Right, where he's hesitating a bit more here, and you can see this is now he went into the throttle once, went off halfway, which keeps a differential lock most likely. So now the understeer starts for him. Now he's back in the throttle, and the car just keeps understeering. So he's managing to put the car in a really wide position here. Now he has absolutely no entry for this left-hander, and me going into the throttle harshly, testing if the rear will step out. Then dialing it back, waiting for the front to bite again, and once it does, again fully into the power, getting the rear around. This gives me the rotation here to keep the car tucked to the inside. And now I'm just managing the turbocharger here, seeing how loose the rear end really gets, and bringing the car to the somewhat wide position. Sorry, I was too good with the mouse here. There we are. What can we see now? Then there's a bit of a harsh brake input from him. Then there's a second harsh brake input for him, because he's now out of position. He probably hasn't been in this position before, so doesn't really know how to react. And I'm in the position that I desired to be in. And now I know in the transition, right? Let's the imaginary center line still in the steering here, somewhere between those two 20s, right? In the middle is the 0. Turning right, turning right, turning right, turning right. And now when I do the transition to the left, first throwing it in a bit, and then there's very, very gentle brake input, because I know the front tire is very unlikely to be able to take more forces, right? I'm already steering, the front is loaded, and every time I go into the brake here, the tire is just unlikely to do anything. So I'm very, very subtle here, just dialing the speed down a very tiny bit to get the car through this corner. Then onto the power aggressively, but now again, things just start compounding, right? My car is more rotated here at the apex. I can be more aggressive. I can carry more speed and still keep the car here on somewhat of a tighter line. And then just keeps compounding, have a slightly wider entry into this, well, similarly double apex right-hander, just that it's a bit tighter than the one before. And so if we want to be there, probably want to go a bit to the right in the data here. Where are we now? There is where we are. I'm just using the arrow keys here, by the way. Plus and minus, and the arrow keys is gonna do you good here. I think by now he has pretty much. Let's see how the delta progresses. I think he has pretty much corrected this here. Does he? he has not. So what is happening here? Let's try to analyze that a bit. It's still slightly wider position here, slightly tighter position here. Looks like he's cutting the curb more, so this is probably upsetting the car. Goes really wide here. Probably works with a lot of steering angle, has a bit of a moment here, oversteer. And that's what loses him the speed. In the end, it is the whole placement through the whole sector that then all kind of materializes at the very end of the section where he doesn't have the car in this slightly better position and then can't build the speed onto the straight here, which then costs him the additional 4/10 here. Sorry, here. The additional 4/10 they come in this acceleration zone through this last left-hander here because he's out of position, can't build the speed, and this then where a lot of time is lost in the speed build-up for the chicane there. So this was more an analysis of where he actually lost the time. So now that we have a harsh braking zone, I have more opportunity to actually show what the like 10 or so things are that I'm looking into. So probably 10, 12 should be the hairpin. So I'm scrolling this down here a bit, placing this. And now the things that we're comparing is A, when do we go off throttle? How quickly do we go off throttle? How quickly do we go into the brake? And where do both lines cross over? What you can see is here, he starts coming, actually, can I go even closer? I think it's fine. So you watch the black dotted line, he's going off the throttle, and it takes a bit now until the brake actually comes on, right? He's halfway or 3/4 off the throttle before the brake is picked up. And if you look at the colored lines, then it's pretty much the brake even starts before going off the throttle, but it's much more in sync. And then both lines kind of cross right in the middle there. Let me go even closer. Then we can see the detail even better. He goes off throttle, takes a bit until he applies the brake. Maybe an insecurity with a braking point there or whatever, but ideally you're seeing the braking starting to be applied when the throttle is being released, and then most of the time those lines will cross right in the middle here. Not ideal, but fairly close here for me. And then the next thing we're checking is how quickly are 100% in the brake reach, and I would say between the two of us, it's pretty much the same, right? So it's a couple meters apart here, a couple meters apart there, not much of a difference. Then what we're checking is the downshifts are happening fairly similar too. And the next thing we're checking is how long are we applying maximum braking? Okay, so that's the fourth thing already that you're checking. And then there's the fifth thing, when do we start the trail braking? And there you have to say we're pretty equal, pretty much perfect. He starts to increase the steering, starts to release the brake, and both works pretty much in sync. So this is very clean driving there. The more he's asking from the front tire in terms of steering down here, the less he's asking in terms of braking here. So we're fairly similar here. Next thing then we're checking, let's go even a bit closer in the section, is when does the braking actually stop? So how deep is the trail braking going? For him it's somewhat here. For me, the trail braking goes, well, a couple meters deeper, probably not that much of an issue. But what we can see is his steering angle then, thing number 6 that you're checking. What is the maximum steering angle? He has like 10 degrees more, probably not much of an issue, but if you're seeing like 50 degrees more, yes, that will become an issue. You're probably steering too much. But anything that's in the realm of 5 to 10 degrees more or less is probably not going to be an issue. Next thing we're checking is how long is the coasting phase? And you can see the brake for him stops here, 2,600 meters, and picks it back up at 2,608 or whatever. So there's a bit of a 6-7 meter coasting phase here somewhere in the entry to the corner. Could be that his speed just didn't match and he needed that, but that's a coasting phase. Since 1.8 patch really indicates you might want to adjust slightly in some case there. Whereas for me, you can see the coasting is pretty much non-existent. I'm right back on the power because this keeps the car rotating, right? You're staying long on the brakes to give additional load to the front. This likely rotates the car around, and if you're off the brake, suddenly the car goes into some slight understeer, and this is what you prevent by going pretty aggressively into the throttle there. So the next thing after the coasting phase is checking how aggressively is the throttle applied, and if you have some type of holding throttle or whatever. So that was number 7 or 8 already. I kind of forgot the counting. And then it's about how quickly is the throttle applied. Of course, when is the throttle applied? You can see here's definitely a tiny bit later. Then he goes to full throttle, dials it back a bit. I guess this is all fine. So he's respecting that the tires just don't have the grip. The traction control is pretty much doing a lot of engagement there. So he's dialing it back to make it less harsh on the traction control, not cut too much power, and yeah, kind of assist the car a bit. This is a tiny bit more pronounced for me, but I guess it's not the main issue. As he, well, I'm gaining a bit on the early exit phase here, but as soon as we're on the straight, he's actually fine. So his exit out of that corner is actually better. He's carrying more speed on the straight, maybe a setup difference here too. So he's gaining back almost a bit more than half a tenth or so. Okay, so let's play this one more time for the next hairpin, which should be 13. So we're checking. Throttle release, same position. For me, brake immediately applied, again, takes him a bit, so we're finding a bit of a pattern for the brake to be applied for him, okay? And then how quickly do we go into the brake? Again, same thing, seems fine. Downshift, okay, tiny bit later, we're completely fine. Last downshift here is actually perfectly in sync, so this is all good. Then we're checking how long is maximum braking and how big is the overlap of turning and the braking input. So we're fairly similar here, bit of turning here until I finally restart releasing the brake, and then I commit to more steering angle. So you can see this all fine here, and rightfully for him, brake started a little later, trail braking starts a little later, turn in starts a little later. Everything is kind of the same, just that his data is somewhat moved to the right here by, what's that gonna be? Let's zoom in a bit. So 28, 31, it's just 3 meters. So not a lot, which will mean he's also probably not losing a lot of time there. Sorry, I needed to reset real quick. So he's gaining some of the braking zone, of course, if he's later on the brake, but I kind of got my exit nicer done. He has a bit more minimum speed here, probably simply because he's just late on the brake, has to slow down the car more, and I'm simply gaining, what's that, a tenth and a half on exit here. Throttle application here, it is pretty much the same thing, right? Just in a different place, and car placement here seems to be the crucial thing. And we can see him being the slightly invisible line, mine the solid line, that I'm keeping the car straight for a tiny bit longer. He's already turning in, or being forced to turn a tiny bit earlier to extend his braking zone because he was slightly late on the brakes. So he gets tempted to already turn in because he knows he's carrying too much speed, takes longer to brake, and then he just overshoots that apex a tiny bit more than I do, and maybe then aggressively rotates the car on power. But my time gain, all the time gain is really happening in this short zone here, from the apex to, yeah, well, now really far, isn't it? That's that here, by this point here in time, everything has already happened. I just gained my time in the first 10-20 meters after the exit, while I'm a bit more better on power, where the car is a bit more straight, and then the car is actually able to convert the throttle into speed, because the inputs here are fine, right? So they didn't tell the full story. It's really the car placement and the amount of rotation I've already done, because I'm staying wider for a tiny bit longer, getting a later turn in, which means the car's more straight for the exit. And I think all those things just keep going on, right? If we move through the data further, we do the same thing over and over again. We always check the same stuff. Here's the braking then for this double right. We can see again, I am a tiny bit earlier off the throttle, immediately into the brake, pretty much in sync. He's off the throttle, takes a bit of time to go into the brake. So we're starting to see the patterns. He's later, then is much harsher on the brake. Trail braking looks nice, but you can see for me, I'm never really reaching maximum braking because we're always already rotating the car. We always have steering input, as you can see here, always below the 0 line here. So we're always already turning to the right, and the front tire is just not capable of taking more braking. So I'm a bit more cautious here, and pretty much my entire braking zone is trail braking. Okay, and it starts earlier, takes a bit longer, deeper into the corner, a very short coasting phase here. His coasting phase is also a bit longer, and then into the power, I'm running the car a tiny bit wider, but I guess this is not the main issue here. It all starts on the brake, which should put you in charge of still placing the car when you're not reaching maximum braking here. Other than that, yeah, he definitely has more steering input here, middle of the corner, right? I get away with the entire turn 110, 114 or so should be my maximum. Whereas his maximum goes up to 170 degrees in the steering, so he probably understeers the car there a bit. Tries to ask a bit much from the front tires. They don't really want to bite. Doesn't get the car rotated without reducing the speed a lot here, which we see above here. So his minimum speed is like 5 kilometers lower or so, and it's also placed earlier, whereas my minimum speed is later on in the corner, which, yeah, we should be able to tell simply by how far I pull the brakes or drag the brakes into the corner. He's already full power from here. So let me quickly turn this around so we can see this. So make his valid on mine a bit invisible. You could see just underneath there, I'm still on the brake where he's already full power here. It's a bit too close together to actually get that difference, and he's taking the correct line. So the inside is here in the charts where you can see I'm still braking while he's already full power. On the exit then, he's gaining a bit back, but it seems like he's not gaining as much back as he lost on the entry here. No, definitely helped me to do the smooth throw braking deep into the corner. And then I'm actually curious how the next hairpin goes, because I said certainly wasn't happy. Yeah, he's gaining back here in the next hairpin, 7.5 tenths down, just 7 coming to the third to last corner there. Not going through the whole lap because you already see those are the patterns that we're really looking at. So let me quickly recap. We are looking at when do we go off throttle, how quickly do we go off throttle, how quickly and when do we go into the brake, so 3 and 4, where do brake and throttle actually cross, how quickly do we reach maximum braking, and what is the maximum braking we're actually reaching. Then we're checking how much overlap is there between braking and steering going into a corner. So if we just pull up the hairpin here one more time, right? When does the trail braking start, and how much steering is there throughout the 100% phase? How much steering is there, and how does the steering increase in line with the trail braking? Very important. Then how long is the coasting phase? When does the braking actually when does the braking actually stop? 10, we're 10 now. How long is the coasting phase, which is 11? When is the throttle applied, and how aggressive is the throttle applied? And then seeing, is the throttle continuously applied, or is there some dialing back happening? In between that, you'd have the maximum turning angle, which is point number 15, and maybe even point number 16. How quickly does the steering decrease, and is it in line with the increase of the throttle? And these should be the 16, 17 things you want to look out for when analyzing your data. We'll automate this at some point in the future because it's quite tricky, but for now I hope this gives you some insight what to do with the tool. And don't be shy to ask in the comments or come straight to Discord to get further insight if this wasn't clear. So for now, let's call it a day, and I hope you enjoyed the tool. We'll put it public now, I think. So bye for now. Speak very soon.